Hey, now, okay. Hi, they said it couldn't be done. They said it was impossible, but look at all of us coming off of these back pews, scooting close. I'm proud of us. As you have heard, as you have seen in little postings there, it's been in the announcements, we're gonna do a little something different for the next 3 weeks, starting today. We're calling it Summer Sunday School for All. And because we're all gonna be talking and thinking and sharing, I want us to do a particularly vivid and meaningful recitation of the prayer of, what is it called in there? Preparation. Yes, please join me in this prayer preparation. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Okay, so before we get into the scripture, I wanted to give us a little bit of context. We're talking about the letter of James, and as I'm giving this context, keep in mind that I will be sourcing readers from among you on the fly, so if you feel particularly called to read, flag that. But before we get to the text, I wanted to just give us a little bit of context for its authorship, the history of this book. For starters, who feels, by show of hands, who feels very comfortable and knowledgeable about this letter? All right, who feels sort of? Great. And then who is like, what is this letter? I've never read it. Okay, excellent. Well, I'll tell you. So it's traditionally thought to be written by James, brother of Jesus, Bishop of Jerusalem in the early church. Now, as scholars are wont to do lately, some people have been arguing that perhaps the letter is pseudonymous, written under James's name, but perhaps not by him. Now, the reason people think that is because it is written in Greek, and James is definitely Jewish and writing to a Jewish audience. And the Greek, I'm not an expert in ancient languages, but the Greek is a pretty high level. So some people think that's evidence, but it's not totally definitive. If it was written by James, then it would have been before 62 CE, which also means it's before the siege of Jerusalem, which is in 70. So it's this little part of the early church right before things get really, really real with the Roman government. If it was written later, then it would have been towards the end of the first century. And the reason some people think that, in addition to the Greek, is that there's a lot of tension with what you'll see here and what we get from Paul's letters. So some people suspect that this was written later to kind of argue about theology via letter. Either way, the authenticity of this letter has been accepted mostly around the 3rd century onward. And so people have said, okay, this is in the Bible, we're keeping it. Now, historical context. Again, Bishop of Jerusalem, written to the Jewish converts outside of Jerusalem. And in the letter, he writes to the diaspora. So these are all these communities that were kind of outside of the city. Based on the text, it seems that this early church group was largely poorer folks. There's a lot in there that we're not reading today, but there's a lot about poorer folks being denied wages, being hauled into court by like aggressive, maybe more upper class people. So there's that. Let's see. Oh yes, right. And then this also was a period where persecutions were just starting to come up. It's before, like the end of the 1st century is when they're really, really intense, and the early Christians are, being hauled in front of lions and all of that. This is just the beginning of it, just the front end. Now, the last thing that I wanted to say about this before we read is just a note on the style of it. It doesn't read like the correspondence that we get from the Paul letters. It is addressed to an audience, but the structure of it doesn't read like a letter, really. It actually, in a lot of ways, reads more like a wisdom text, like Proverbs or Psalms in certain ways. You'll get these chunks of a theme, and then there's no transition sentence. It's just onto another theme. But then it comes back, and so there are these three, in my mind, these 3 themes kind of get braided together throughout it. But that is why, if you look at the reading for today and for the next few weeks, there's like a chunk, and then we'll skip, and then another chunk, because I'm trying to bring together all the text that's talking about each particular theme. So that said, you should read the text. Now, I have a mic here. Is anybody feeling brave and wants to tackle chapter 1, 19 through 25? Awesome, Kim, thank you. And I'm gonna, well, while you do that, I'm gonna grab my phone so I can set a little timer so we don't get lost in the sauce. Yes, please. All right.
You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers, who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world.
Thank you. Before we go to the second part of the reading, which again, if you feel brave and excited, you're on deck. But I'm curious, were there any phrases or words that just jumped out at us in that? Be doers, not hearers. Yeah, yeah. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent.
And is this slow to anger? Isn't that somewhere else? Slow to anger, and is that somewhere else also in the New Testament?
That's a great question.
I don't know the answer, but is he quoting also that?
I don't think it's a quote, although it would not surprise me if we found that.
Abounding in steadfast love. Where do we get that?
It's slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Don't ask me where.
Okay, we can handle that after class, yeah. Do you, Lynn, would you be interested in reading the second part of the reading? Chapter 2, verses 14 to 26. Hand this to you.
Sure. 14 to 26, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Faith without works is dead. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm, and eat your fill," and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith, and I have works." Show me your faith apart from your works, and I by my works will show you my faith. You believe that God is one. You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you senseless person, that faith apart from works is barren? Was not our ancestor Abraham justified by works when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was brought to completion by the works. Thus the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned it to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Likewise, was not Rahab, the prostitute, also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another road? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is also dead.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Now I'm about to pitch it to y'all, but one other little bit of history that I wanted to throw out that I did not know until researching for this is that Martin Luther, famously justified by faith alone, not works, tried to have this letter thrown out of the Bible. He called it a letter of straw. And in his particular Bible that he republished and rearranged, moved it out of the rest of the New Testament into an appendix in the back because he could not resolve the tension between a passage like this and other things that Paul said. So I think the question I want to ask to get us started is, do you see a conflict there? Is this a contradiction, or is something else going on? How do we think about that tension between what are we justified by faith or are we justified by works? What is the, does these sound like two opposing ideas?
No, but I do have a question.
I'm going to pass them.
Paul, I don't know what that he said or wrote that would be in.
Yes.
Clarify.
Absolutely. Paul kind of famously argues that we are justified by faith alone, that only like what we are believing in our hearts is like, that's the crux of belief in Christianity. Now, I don't want to put words in Paul's mouth, but sometimes that gets used to kind of gloss over the value of works. And that, I mean, that's us, not Paul, but hand this over to you.
Yeah, the way I've thought about this passage is that when you have true faith, you're often compelled to do works, so it comes naturally. So, yeah.
I think the two should be combined. Doesn't Jesus say, if you have fed the hungry, you have fed me. If you have visited those in prison, you have visited me, etc., etc. So those are clearly actions, works, and you do those, hopefully inspired by faith.
So it's the big quandary between, is it faith or is it works, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, couldn't it be both, right? So there was something, I wish I had this in front of me, but there was something in the reflection that I did a couple of weeks ago that said, when we were talking about manna, that said that Jesus being the bread of life and bringing that manna into your spirituality leads to what leads to the good works that please God. So in other words, if you are, why can't it be both? If you are spiritual. But I think Paul's thing was, it's by grace alone, that's really the big difference between that and what James is saying.
Grace alone, yeah.
It's so interesting to me, growing up, the thing that put me off to church was it seemed like often the people who went to church, when they came away from church, they behaved in a way that did not seem to merit that. And then I also think of more recently how we talk about walking the talk, which is, to me, the shorthand for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that many of us here have had similar experiences of kind of seeing that disconnect between hearing the word and doing the word, right?
Sunday Christians.
Sunday Christians,
right.
yeah.
Well, on a bad day, I can be one.
Well, yes, I mean, indeed.
Apologies,
Yeah.
I was late.
Oh, it's totally
Just,
okay.
moved back here and there's so much going on.
Yeah.
But my Bibles are packed, so I just was during breakfast looking things up.
Oh, yeah.
And I hit across, what Luther said, and I was shocked. I was raised Catholic, so good works were important. My dad was Lutheran, and I ended up leaving the Catholic Church to Lutheran. So I kind of have both perspectives. Yeah. But something struck me what Paul said, and it shocked me that he wondered, or not Paul, Martin Luther King, whether the Jews had wanted to cause harm to the Christians. Did you ever read about that? And thought they could stir up controversy. And was it prejudice on his part, or?
From Martin Luther?
Yeah, I can show you the source.
I would love to see
I'm
that.
stumbling around trying to read James,
Oh,
again,
yeah.
because it's been a long time
Yeah.
since, I read the whole Bible.
Yeah, truthfully,
You hadn't come across it one?
I don't know about that
I was
off the top of my head. Yeah.
I guess it's one quote not quoted very often. Very controversial.
I think Martin Luther has a number of those. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry. Here you go.
I think it's important to think about what we consider to be faithful work, because Martin Luther in his time was reacting to the actions of the Catholic Church, which he deemed to be, okay, they're all about good works, but their good works meant, accumulating wealth for themselves and also kind of paying your way to heaven in a way. I mean, obviously it was much more complicated than that, but so I think in a way, you sort of need to have both. And when you focus too much on the work, but not think about it in the context of what it means to be doing something that, is faithful, it can also be dangerous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm curious if any of us have had the experience of being too focused on works and not enough on faith. Seeing some nods. How is that manifested? How did that feel? How did you know that was the imbalance that you were experiencing?
Self-growth opposed to showing off in a way.
Yeah, self-growth as opposed to showing off.
So thinking that, being self-righteous about, oh, look at what all the good works that I do, right? As opposed to, it is to the glory of God to which I take this action.
That's also where burnout comes from. Burnout.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, right. Exactly.
Absolutely. Kim was saying that's where burnout comes from, and that's kind of where my head was at, is that I imagine we've had this feeling as well, where you're doing the work and it takes so much energy, but somehow you're coming away feeling really fed and rejuvenated by all the work that you did. And when that's not happening, I often think that's a clue. That's if I'm just expending energy, but I'm not getting back, this work is designed to be reciprocal. That's the nature of the relationship. But if I'm just putting out and not receiving any of this energy from the people I'm supposed to be helping, then I need to work on something. Why can't I receive that gratitude? Why is that not nourishing me?
You can deal with that same kind of thing in the way of feeling bitter about the good work. I struggle with this a little bit, after the 20th person has asked me for money on the street that day. It's something I struggle with all the time because of who was it that was quoting Matthew earlier about, for I was sick and you fed me, for I was, on the street. So meeting that expectation, but then being in the real world, being confronted all the time by things I cannot fix with a dollar, So, and therefore maybe sometimes not being like I'm giving generously with a good heart, but more begrudgingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing some gears turning.
I just want to note that everybody kind of said how it's a struggle to put in the works when you already have day-to-day responsibilities, which we all have, that weigh on our shoulders. And I guess my thought is, why are they mutually exclusive? Maybe part of the point of this passage is, one of my favorite sayings in the world is there are two ways to make art. They are to do the things which are considered art, or they are to make the things you do art. So can't the same thing be said of faith? That in those day-to-day responsibilities and tasks, can't you make that a work of faith by putting faith into those things as well? How you parent, how you go to your job, how you serve your community with your hobbies, and how you enter into that community. Isn't it just part of that your faith is a part of those works? Like, why should they be separate?
I wonder what that looks like in practice, or what it feels like. Yeah, rewarding, yes. I'm thinking of, I can't attribute the quote, but it's one of my favorites where someone's talking about, every step I take in the day is a prayer. Everything that I do is its own prayer. And prayer is not just putting it into words and sending it up. It's somehow a way of doing everything.
So the dangerous thing about just going on, it's by God's grace, is that in theory, you can sit with that Sunday Christian thing and not realize that faith and spirit is supposed to lead you to make choices that help to, serve God's purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I wouldn't want to put words in Paul's mouth. I don't think that was his intention in writing things like that. But, as inheritors of a tradition, we have seen how that can enable kind of wandering off the path a little bit, right? I wanted to shift us, this is exciting. We're at 16 minutes. I'm going to push us just a hair. And then we'll move on. But I was curious, this phrase jumped out at me, and it shows up at a couple of other times in the letter. But James refers to the law of liberty, which really stood out to me because I don't think I've seen that anywhere else in the Bible. It is not generally talking about liberty. What does that mean to you? What does that bring up for you? What do you think he means by that?
I'd love to know the original, how it was translated. To me, that's one of the translation questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down. That's something to bring in next week.
You said freedom.
Freedom, yes. I hear that, I feel that, I like it. There's a lot of, in the text that we inherit and the tradition that we inherit, there's often a lot of emphasis on obedience and submission. I think it's really interesting to approach something like this from the angle of freedom. We don't do good works because we're obliged to, but because we're free to.
If he calls it the perfect law, then can we think that the perfect law is love God with all your heart and your neighbor, and that's all you need? So then it's, because I went back to what he says before, it's called the perfect law, the law of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So could that be the law he's talking about?
If you're asking me personally, individually, I would say absolutely. I think it's clear that in the Gospels, when Jesus provides that answer to the question of what is the greatest commandment, that he means it. He says all the law hangs from this.
But the issue then for me becomes, does your freedom impinge on the freedom of someone else? It's not straightforward to me. My freedom, love it, but if it means somebody else is not free or is in any way inhibited even by my freedom.
So freedom doesn't really exist without responsibility, right? If you don't have responsibility
Or acknowledgement of another person.
to others, and
Well, yeah, and I think that also begs the question of, we, especially in America, we have a lot of ideas about what it means for an individual to be free. What does it mean for a people to be free? What does it mean for a community to be free? It's different than I get to do whatever I want.
I think it also, to me, means to be free to not like someone or something, but still respect it and still acknowledge it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we could go on and on and on, and I really want to, but in the interest of everybody's brunch plans, I think let's put a button on this. And yeah, I'm just so excited to be doing this with y'all. Thank you for sharing all your ideas, for being so present, and we'll do more over the next couple of weeks. Man.
What has always struck me about faith is that I think it's in Corinthians, love or charity, hope, and faith. And so what I have come up with in my mind that thinks this way, we have love and therefore loving. We have hope, therefore hoping. Why can't we have faith and therefore faithing?
That's good. I'm not even going to sum that up. That's the perfect line.